Hello everyone and welcome to chess.com's World Bullet Chess Championship. We have a very nice game between Hansen and MagnusCarlsen. You can see that the ratings are very much different from the usual classical or rapid or blitz ratings. These are bullet ratings, and as you can play many more games than you can play in shorter time formats, of course the ratings will be higher. And okay, they've played a lot of games. I chose the one that I thought was the most interesting to show, as we have not one exchange sacrifice but two exchange sacrifices in well, everyone's favorite, the King's Indian defense. So let's check it out. Neither of these two fine gentlemen need any introduction. Eric has the white pieces and he opens with pawn to d4. Knight to f6 by Magnus, c4 g6, going for the King's Indian defense, knight to c3 and bishop to g7. We have pawn to e4. So all fairly standard stuff, and pawn to f3 now. We have pawn to d6 and bishop to e3. We have pawn to e5 and now knight g to e2. E captures on d4, knight captures on d4, and now just pawn to c6. We have queen to d2. At some point you might even consider castling queenside, maybe trading off the dark square bishops. Rook to e8 and now bishop to e2. Castling queenside is a bit more popular, but bishop to e2, and here they're actually following a very popular game that was played in none other than a World Chess Championship match. But we're going to get to that. We have pawn to d5. Eric's king is now still in the center of the board, so of course Magnus wants to open up the position. E captures on d5, c captures, and now pawn to c5. Interestingly, the game that I've mentioned was Anatoly Karpov versus Garry Kasparov. It was played in game 11 of their Lyon, New York World Chess Championship in 1990, where Karpov decided to castle kingside. Also, you can castle queenside here. You could also play rook to d1. Here, there are many possible ideas here. But there it goes for pawn to c5. It's sort of a newer, very tricky approach, but if you know how to play against it, it shouldn't yield anything good for white. But it's bullet, so of course you can play anything. So knight to c6, and now we have castles. Okay, instead of knight to c6, you could have gone for the c5 pawn, then knight to b3 defends the pawn, and the game continues. And now, well, you could continue with something passive like bishop to f8, try and win the pawn, go queen to a5. Magnus just goes rook captures on e3, and this is the first exchange sacrifice. I know some of you will be like, okay, but exchange sacrifice is not a real sacrifice, but it's still a sacrifice. How do I don't know how to call it otherwise. And okay, queen captures on e3, and now queen to f8, getting ready to pick up that c5 pawn. And now the question is, can you just play knight to b3 and say you've sacrificed this for nothing? Well, if you play knight to b3, there is a very tricky move here, and it actually wins the game for black. So just for fun, feel free to pause the video and try to find this winning idea in this position that never occurred while I give you a couple of seconds. So, for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding this incredible, well, it's sort of a combination of everything, and for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is pawn to d4. This wins a piece, and here you just resign, as if you capture the pawn, knight captures on d4. Yes, you are defending it, but there's knight to g4. And now the queen is attacked, and also there's a double attack on the knight on d4, and if you capture, then bishop captures on d4, picks up the queen, and if you don't capture, then you have to move the queen. What can you play? A queen to f4, but then again you capture this with check, and once the king moves, then you can play knight to f2 check, and now you have to capture. If you don't, if you just play king g1, then knight to d3 opens up a discovery, and you lose the queen on f4. So here you would have to capture, and not only do you win your piece back, but you also win the exchange back, but you also will be an extra piece at the end of this. So that's why after queen to f8, Eric cannot just go knight to b3. He plays knight captures on c6, b captures on c6, and now king to h1. And yes, this is bullet, but it's 1+1. So when you're playing online and you do get increment, this is quite a lot of time, especially for these incredible bullet experts like Eric and Magnus. So here they're still in the game that Karpov and Kasparov were playing in their World Chess Championship match. The game continued with rook to b8, and it's Definitely a move that makes sense, going after the b2 pawn, but Magnus plays a different move. He doesn't go for the move that Kasparov played. He played a knight to d7, and now it's different. In the actual game, Karpov versus Kasparov, b3 was played, but here you can't do that because now the bishop has opened up, and this would be very dangerous. And of course, it is only now as of move 16 that we have a completely new game, which is somewhat weird to you guys. Sometimes you will be like, but how can they play such incredible chess with only a minute on the clock in the second increment? Well, that's just how good they are. Most of the games they played are like 90-80% accuracy. So knight to a4, defending the pawn on c5, also defending the pawn on b2, and now rook to b8, putting pressure on the pawn, and now rook a to b1. Of course, you cannot play b3. Rook to b4, Magnus brings the rook into the game, and now pawn to b3. We have pawn to h5 and bishop to d3, and here Magnus gives up the second exchange. He plays rook captures on a4 to grab the c5 pawn, and then to just try and win the game, pushing those central pawns, because now after b captures on a4 and you eliminated the pawn on c5, you get two connected pass pawns in the center of the board. Is this enough for giving up not one exchange but two? Well, let's see how the game continues. Rook to b8. This is a very nice move. The bishop now cannot move. Both the queen and the king are on the back rank. Knight to d7 attacks the rook, rook a8, and now pawn to c5. Magnus with full control over the center. The bishop is looking very nice here, but it's very dangerous. Bishop to b5. The threat is bishop captures knight on d7, as the bishop cannot move. So here we have knight to b6, attacks the rook, defends the bishop, and rook captures on a7. We have bishop to e6 by Magnus, and now rook to b7. So Magnus is in a very, very difficult position here, but he, of course, has the two connected pass pawns, and he starts pushing them. Pawn to d4, queen to g5, and now knight to d5. And here, there are many moves that are winning for Eric, like pawn to a5, like bishop to d7, bishop to c4 also, but he played bishop to c6, which is also kind of winning. It just allows Magnus a free tempo, and that's a very dangerous thing to give a player like Magnus. Queen to d6. And now you can just continue pushing your pass pawn because the bishop on c6 is hanging. So he captures on d5, but now bishop captures, attacks the rook. So again, you cannot start advancing your pass pawn, and you should play something like queen to e7. And the game continues. Probably, of course, you don't trade, then comes rook to b5, and so on. The game continues. But here, Eric actually played pawn to a5. He gave up the rook on b7. Maybe he blundered it. It's hard to say because it's a bullet. But he might have had some idea. Bishop captures on b7 was played. Now comes rook to b1 and queen to e6, offering the bishop here for a very nice checkmate on e1. So, of course, Eric plays pawn to h4, and now just bishop to a6, getting the bishop out of harm's way. We have queen captures on c5, and now pawn to d3. Magnus continues pushing his pass pawn. Queen to b6, now offering a queen trade, and now, well, you could go for something like queen captures on a2. Magnus plays pawn to d2, and here the trick is it's actually a pawn blunder, a pure pawn blunder, because you can take it with queen to d8 check, followed by queen captures on d2. And yeah, you can also see just even though they are such extremely strong players, they will blunder at this time control. Even though I believe Magnus at this point was over 30 seconds on the clock, he hasn't even used up half of his time. But yeah, Eric missed queen to d8 check to pick up the free pawn. He played rook to d1, just blocking the pawn, and now Magnus played queen to e1 with check, and he was in this position on move 35 that Eric Hansen resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. The problem is, of course, if you just move the king, then you lose the rook, and if you take the queen, then another queen comes into the game with check, and after king to h2, of course, you just get checkmated. Bishop to e5 check, and that's it. There's no zero counterplay here. King h3 and queen to h1 will be checkmate. So yeah, very, very nicely done by both of them. All of the games, like I said, were played at an incredible accuracy. Magnus won a lot more than Eric, so Magnus's games were a bit more accurate. But here are the final results. So Magnus won the match with 16.5 to 1.5. Very nicely done. And also in the other match of the quarterfinals, Arjun Erigaisi lost with 6 points to 11 to Tuan Minh Le. So we'll see what happens later on in the tournament. So this is only one of the games that I thought was very nice, as we all enjoy a nice King's Indian defense. We all enjoy to see an exchange sacrifice in the King's Indian, and now we've seen what happens with 2 exchange sacrifices. It's a shame Eric gave up that rook on c6. Probably would have been a very different game, but still the 2 exchange sacrifices, putting such pressure, having the 2 connected pass pawns, the bishop controlling this diagonal, you can see that it's not easy. And if you are playing online, if you are playing at lower time controls, you can always consider tactics like these, and it will put your opponents under a lot of pressure. That's the game. Really hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any of your own favorites, do use hashtag suggestion and I will go over them. I would like to thank David Kimura, Rod Hill, Phil Malthus, Johan Bridger, and Richard Phillips for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.